graduated, elevated. Now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves, take it to the top one time, non-stop.
Hello and welcome to PhD Hard Talk. Thank you so much, Dr. Tamala Malerk, for your time this afternoon, well, morning, wherever you are in the world. Could you please introduce yourself and your research?
Sure. So I am Dr. Tamala Malerk. I'm currently in Germany. Last time we spoke, I was in Texas in the United States. So my research deals with the British Empire, particularly the British Empire's involvement in India, as well as modern Europe, women and gender, and American public history.
Lovely. So the first question is, why did you apply for a PhD?
So this really goes all the way back to when I was 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And my friends and I were sitting in AP European History, which is a college level class that you can take while you're still in high school. I'm not sure if the UK has like a similar system. And we were all just sitting in this class, and instead of paying attention, we were talking about a college that we would just open up one day so that we could be professors at. And I was going to teach European history. My friend was going to teach American history. My one friend was going to be the theater professor. And we had another friend who was going to be the English professor. We'd all just kind of like decided that we were going to open up a college one day. And we still haven't opened the college, but we are like well on our way to almost all of us having our PhDs. So, you know, this is just 30-something-year-old Tamala living out 17-year-old Tamala's dream.
Lovely. No, I love that. You know, it's always nice to have a vision and to work towards it. Sometimes the journey is just a bit painful, but you get there in the end, don't you?
You do. I finished my PhD in May 2022, and I remember just like swearing I would never look at my PhD dissertation again. It is 268 pages long. The final editing office and I went back and forth over 6 or 7 emails about the formatting of footnote 686. And it was just, I was like, I'm never going to look at this thing again. I'm done. I've got my PhD. And it was about 6 months ago where I was just like, I don't know, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to start looking into like, do I want to submit this for journal articles or book chapters, and maybe even turn it into a book? I think I'm ready to be heard again.
No, that is lovely. That moves me on to the next question. What are the 3 top tips that you would give to somebody who's thinking of applying for a PhD?
Well, the first is if you're doing it just because you want to be a college professor, don't. And it's not to sound like harsh or cruel. It's just like the reality is there are more and more people graduating with PhDs every year and less professor positions. And that would just be like my number one advice is I just don't want people to like do this and think like I'm gonna like graduate and like they're just the jobs are going to be waiting. The jobs will not be waiting. You can use your PhD and get a variety of jobs. Professor just might not be it. So that would be my first bit. The second is if the only reason you're doing it is so that people will call you doctor, that is a completely legitimate reason, and I 100% support that.
We love that. I too want to be called doctor, so I definitely understand.
And the third thing that I would advise is always to remember that graduate school, whether you're working on a master's or a PhD, I don't want to say like, oh, it's so easy, but it's very formulaic. And typically, if you're getting a graduate degree, it's doing something you love or at least really, really like. And so you have a passion for it and you want to be there. And so it's graduate school is, again, not easy, but it's enjoyable, and but life is hard, and life does not stop when you go to graduate school. And it's very hard sometimes to exist outside of that graduate school bubble, because you're never just a graduate student. You are somebody's child, you are somebody's spouse, you are somebody's best friend, you are somebody's sibling, you are a lot of times somebody's employee. And yeah, graduate school is awesome, but life is hard, and those two still have to intermingle.
I think that is so precise, because if you look at Twitter and if you look at some of the comments, and a certain group, they find it challenging to balance grad school and, we would say, higher education in terms of the UK, and having their family life, which is a spouse, children, and adapting to the constant changes in terms of deadlines, publications, etc. So I think you really nailed it then, by saying that. The next question then that I would ask, just to add on to the points that you've mentioned, would you say a PhD is a sprint or it's a marathon, and why?
Oh, it's definitely a marathon. Because I know things work a little bit different in the UK. So I'll try and cater it to like both of our continents here. So in the US, typically when you start a PhD, I did a humanities PhD, my PhD is in history. So my advice may vary by department. But I believe in the UK and other European countries, once you're at the PhD level, it is strictly like dissertation, and like you're working particularly with someone on a specific topic. Whereas in the US, like for example, my program was 2 years of coursework followed by, and it varies, 2 to 3 years of strictly dissertation work. So it's at minimum 4 years, upwards sometimes of 5 or 6 years. And you can't just go that entire time, or you will burn out. So I would definitely say it is a marathon, and you have to give yourself grace. You have to like know that done in terms of a PhD is just as good as perfect. And you're not, and this is something I had to accept with my dissertation. I was just like, I am going to submit a dissertation that will, every like academic publisher will be ready to publish as a book. And my advisor was like, that's cute. And I very quickly learned, I was like, my dissertation is great. I love it. And I'm already like, and we're going to change this, and this has to go, and we have to add this. But it's done. And done, it is, as I said, done is just as good as perfect.
No, I really love that, because I think often we want to do a PhD, but we don't think about at the end what's going to happen when you hand it in. And with us here in the UK, and not to speak of other countries, you would get like your minor revisions, major revisions, or you've passed essentially. And I think everybody from my colleagues, they're just like, yeah, major revisions was fine. Like, at least it's done. I can work on the
I think
revisions.
mine was very similar. I defended in November and graduated in May, and I believe was I did thankfully have minor revisions. But I also had all from November to like April-ish to get those revisions done. And it's just like it and my advisor was completely honest with me. He was like, it is very rare for someone to be like, yes, pass with absolutely no revisions. And I was like, okay, that does make me feel better. So much better.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
but yeah.
I agree. I've had that as well from my supervisors. They've been very honest in that sense to say, yeah, it's better done. Revisions, they come with it, you improve. That's what happens as well with publications because you send them out, you get reviewer one, two, three coming back to you, and then you improve until you get to a point where you go by, this is perfect now. Well, not perfect, but it's ready
Yes.
to be finalized. So no, lovely. So in terms of your research gap, then looking at gender and your research, which links into Gandhi and Mira Behn, how did you identify your research gap? For those who haven't watched the first part, this is repetition, but we'll go past it anyway.
So, as I said, like now, especially going back 2-3 years later and seeing, okay, well, how does this, what do I do to make this publishable? How does this work? One of the things that, like, when I was looking into it, I was just, looking over my dissertation. I was just like, this woman, who, for those who missed the last episode, she joined Gandhi at 33 years old and worked with the Indian independence movement from 1925 until 1959. And one of the major gaps, at least for me, that I noticed was there's a whole 33 years that she lived that I just kind of like gloss over for in probably 4 or 5 paragraphs. And then there's a whole second life she lived post the independence movement where she worked with the environment. That again, I just kind of like gloss over in my 6-page epilogue of my dissertation. And I was just like, there's decades where I'm just like, cha la la la, and this happened. And so that was definitely, I don't know if, because I know what happened, but it just never, like, when you're deciding like what goes in and what doesn't, like, that's just something that I was like, okay, that's a gap that we're going to have to address. And again, I don't know if it's so much of a gap, but it was definitely something that I was like, oh, this is something that needs more attention. And Mira Behn went to jail during her time of working with Gandhi, as many did. And as a white British woman, she was treated way differently in the jails than the upper class Indian women were, than the lower class and caste Indian women were. And I do kind of get to profile one woman, but there is so much in terms of gender, race, and class in the colonial prison system that, I would just love to explore more. And I know that other scholars have explored more. And I'm just like, oh yeah, this needs more attention than the, however many pages it got in my dissertation.
So I think the moral of the story here for anybody who's applying for a PhD is that hindsight is a beautiful thing, because in our previous discussion, we did touch on caste, didn't we? And I did, probe in terms of her being white British and the fact that Gandhi came to the UK for his education. So he was already on a different path compared to, let's say, we'll say indigenous Indian people that live in India, that breathe and see the life in that era, essentially. So to go over your research gap then, so you've looked back and you've identified certain possibilities in terms of for publication.
Yep.
But for somebody who's sat at home going, okay, I have an interest, maybe I want to look at an orange. And I think, where do I find the research gap? Where do they look if they want to identify the research gap?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, because for me, it was taking the time away to discover what was missing. And unfortunately, when you're in your PhD programs, you don't necessarily have that. Like, you don't have that time. And I think that part of it is also having these discussions, because the last time you and I spoke, you had brought up things like, oh, this reminds me of this character in Pride and Prejudice. And I'm like, never actually read this.
Oh yeah, we did it.
And since then I've bought the book, and I was like, oh, I get what she was talking about now. So I like having these discussions with people, not just in your field, but like with fellow graduate students, with scholars as a whole, be it, you know, through venues like yours. Conferences are great. And I will tell anyone who's never been to a conference before, you will not get a question. You will speak for 20 minutes, and then the person will stand and you'll be like, oh, does anybody have any questions? And the first thing out of their mouth will be like, well, it's more of a comment than a question. And I see your nod of love, like, yes, this is. But I will say, I've done about 12 or so conferences, and there have been through those comments but not questions, I have gotten some very insightful information of like, have you looked at it from this angle, or, you know, looking at it through this lens, or from this scholar. Sometimes just, you know, sometimes people are just like, and this is how it relates to my research, which is totally valid for them. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not, but it's really, again, if you can't take the time to get away from it, you know, right in that moment, give it to somebody. And especially if you have somebody who's not familiar with the information, that can be super helpful too, because it's not going to just show you your research gaps. It's also going to show you, like, I don't want to say knowledge gaps, but like your accessibility gaps, like who can pick this up and understand what I'm saying.
I love that. And, you know, often, I mean, I've done a video on this in terms of conferences and identifying your blind spots through the commentary, and the one person who doesn't say anything but then pulls you the next day and go, oh, you know, I was sat in there and, you know, I was thinking about it. And then they share something and you're like, so you couldn't share? You know, when I was nervous.
I love those people so much, because you can tell, because for them, it's not about the like saying it in front of everybody and getting that like, I'm so smart credit. It's like, no, they actually did take time to think about what you said and the material you presented. And I'm just like, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much.
No, we love it. We love it. So the next question has to do with the methodology, because we know in a dissertation or in a thesis that is top tier. You need to get it right, and people need to understand how you've done it and the relevance of doing what you've done. So how does then one decide as to which research methodology to go for, in terms of qualitative and quantitative, in terms of interviews or case studies or books, in your case, in terms of history? How does one make that decision?
Well, I will say in history, a lot of the times the decision is made for you. The farther back you go, I don't want to say the less you have, but the less variety you have. Thankfully, I work a lot in the 20th century. So I was actually surprised that, like, when I was doing my research, I had, you know, the traditional, I had the books, I had the articles, but I also had radio broadcast. I had, they were YouTube videos, but originally at the time it wasn't YouTube videos, you know, a news broadcast or something. Like, I had videos, I had radio. I was like, this is amazing, because like my friends that work in the 1500s and the 1600s, like they don't have that variety of medium. And I think that when you're dealing with a different variety of mediums, or choosing like what's relevant and what's not, a lot of it is, and this is going to sound horrible, a lot of what you read or what you gather is going to be really interesting. A lot of it is not, but you may read a 200-page book for a 2-line quote that you use. And you just have to love the fact that you are now 200 pages smarter on whatever book you read. And I think that when you first start out, I think it's great, because you are more open to the variety of sources and just like absorbing everything you can. But as you get closer and closer to your deadline, I think it's also you, and one of my advisors was, he was very concise about it. He was just like, you'll know when you know. And he was like, you'll know when you don't need to read the background information anymore. You'll know when you've gotten this particular aspect, because you can never learn it all. But you will start to notice when your resources start citing the same sources.
Of course.
When they start repeating the same quotes, you'll pick up on that. And thankfully, and hopefully it is, as you're getting towards the completion process. But I would just say when you're narrowing it down at first, be less picky because you're still picking up contextual information and background information. And like, you never know what like side path you'll go on. As I said, there's a whole chapter in my dissertation on colonial prisons that I wasn't sure. I thought it would be maybe like a side story or just like and it turned into an entire chapter. So also like, you never know.
No, I love that. And thank you for explaining, because, based on questions as well, when people do ask me, I always say, it's always exciting to be microwavable, right? And now we have AI, and I'll explain from your face. When you put microwavable popcorn, it's like literally a minute, 2 minutes is done, right? But then with research, you have to read, because the more you read, there's some papers that are difficult to understand, but based on what your advisor said and my experience, you read so many papers, it gets to a point where you know what they're talking about, and you're just verifying the references and checking to say, right. And you can go through your thesis as well. Now you can critically evaluate your own work, knowing fully well where you've paraphrased just for the sake of it.
Yeah. And that was also the similar advice that I was given in terms of like, when do you quote somebody and when when is it just common knowledge? And because it's like, technically anything that is not your own original thought has originated elsewhere. Your entire dissertation or your entire thesis would be quote. And it was just like, when you've read the same thing again over and over and over in your sources, now it is common knowledge. Like, you don't necessarily have to source or cite that particular source. It's when you pull like that specific way that an author said something, that's when it's, hey, we quote this, we paraphrase, we cite.
No, I love it. So the next point then has to do with funding. As we're doing our PhD, we have to attend the conferences, which you've touched on already. We're given a budget for the entire year, based on a scholarship. If you're self-funding, it's your own money, or you can apply through the university if your university provides. I don't know if you applied for funding while you were in university. How does one work on that strategy? Because it is important to apply for funding.
So it's very similar. I attended my PhD program on a fellowship, but we didn't have a specific budget separate for conferences. We had to apply for different awards and scholarships that were from different departments, like the student council. And I feel so bad because they gave me money. Had travel grants, and you could apply every semester for up to $500. But what it was you would apply, and if they would say, okay, we will give you up to $500, but then you had to turn around and give the receipts. So, you had to put it on a credit card or pay out of pocket, however, you had to self-fund, and then you were reimbursed. And the advice that I would give to people is, go to your department, go to your advisors. They will know where money is, because I didn't know travel grants existed. And sometimes it will be through your department, sometimes it will be through, like I was in the Department of History at the College of Arts and Sciences. So the College of Arts and Sciences had travel grants.
Mhm.
So I applied to their program, and I'll never forget the first time. I was actually a master's degree student,
Mm.
and I applied for a travel grant, and I sent it in, and the woman was like, the way that this is now, you're not going to get the travel grant. You need to brag about yourself a lot more.
Mm.
And I was like, oh. And she's like, I can look at your transcript and see, like, you have things to brag about. You need to sell yourself better.
Mm.
And that was the best advice that I was ever given, because, you know, growing up and things, like, we're taught to be humble. We're taught to be, you know, very, I don't want to say reserved, but like it's a negative to just be like, I'm the best and I'm awesome and all these things. And it's the exact opposite when you're asking people for money, apparently.
Mhm.
It's, you have to say, I'm the best, I'm awesome, and here is why you should give me money. So that would be my advice, is when you're applying for these awards, and you can't just say, like, I'm the best and I'm awesome. You have to say why you are the best and why you are awesome. And I'm not doubting anybody's awesomeness or best abilities, but like, you can't just say it. You do have to, like, back it up. But don't sell yourself short and get that money.
No, I love it. That's the same advice. I think the first time I wrote something, my supervisor was like, you have to make it easy on the eye, because they have to read it and the information is already available. They shouldn't search for it, because then you're irritating them, because they have to look for it and then they have to send it back and then you send it back again. It takes so much time, so make sure everything's in there, essentially, which is what you're saying. So then the next point is, I know you didn't really look at Gandhi specifically, but why Gandhi's story?
And I don't want to. I'll sell the, or I'll say the short version for anybody
Mhm.
who watched the last episode. But I spent a year in between getting my master's degree and starting my PhD program teaching 7th grade social studies,
Mhm.
and how you teach about the Indian independence movement and British imperialism in India is through, like, the 1980s something Gandhi movie, which is about
Mhm.
4 hours long. And I taught 2 social studies classes a day. So I just kept watching this movie over and over and over again. And after, like, the week was up, I never really thought about it again. And fast forward about a year later, I'm in my PhD program. I had a completely different topic. I was going to write the ultimate biography of Henry VIII's 6th wife.
Yeah.
And Alison Weir beat me to it. And, you know, she's one of my favorite authors, so I can't
Mhm.
blame her. But here I was, like a semester into my program, and I was like, okay, well, I don't have a dissertation topic now. Oh, and I'm in this British Empires course, and I need a
Mhm.
topic for just the semester paper. And I hadn't really dealt in the British Empire before, outside of, you know, world history classes or anything like
Mhm.
that. And I thought back to teaching 7th grade, and what did I know? I knew about, you know, this Gandhi movie that I had watched
Mhm.
over and over again. And I was like, well, there's this woman that appears about 45 minutes into the movie, and then she doesn't appear again until the end of the movie, which was
Mhm.
historically inaccurate for her second appearance, but we won't get into that. And I was like, who is this woman that was so important to merit a, like, appearance in the movie, but not necessarily, like, be the focus or have a major focus?
Mhm.
And so that was just that paper, which was a 20-page British Empire class seminar paper on Mira Behn and her involvement in the movement, introduced me more
Mhm.
so to, you know, Gandhi's I wouldn't necessarily Gandhi's movement for independence, but Gandhi's involvement in the movement for
Mhm.
Indian independence. So yeah, it was teaching 7th grade for a year, and just, again, when you have to, because you have to watch, you know,
Mhm.
55 minutes of the movie, rewind it, or with the DVD. So go back to,
Mhm.
you know, rewatch the same 55 minutes again. And then I had to watch the movie prior to the kids watching it. So I knew, like, what was not appropriate for 12-year-olds. And so I just got really, really up close and personal with the Ben Kingsley Gandhi movie. And then just got, again, I ended up in a British Empires course because it fit my
Mhm.
schedule. And yeah, it's a series of random life circumstances that just brought me to Gandhi. And again, not necessarily Gandhi himself, but Gandhi's involvement in the movement, which led me to Mira Behn and who she was and her life, that like how her, again, random circumstances in life, just like she was infatuated with Beethoven, fell in love with a composer. He was married, and she just was like, well, you know, dejected in love, let's move to India and follow Gandhi. She read her Gandhi biography and was like, he sounds cool. Let's you know, let's go to India and live in an ashram and help Gandhi with his movement for independence.